What's up, guys? We're back. It's season two of Katson's Corner. We've been renewed. I've been re-signed. This is the show where we talk about the NFL draft all season long, from a Chargers perspective, of course. I'm your host, Alex Katson. Same way you see my name spelled on the screen. Super excited to be back. It's so nice to see you guys again. We're going to be talking about some of the games that the Chargers went and visited this last week to start off the college football season. Obviously, the Chargers start their season on Sunday. If you are just here for Charger stuff and you just want to wait until the game starts, Tyler, the other Alex, Steven, all those guys will have all that stuff. But we're here to talk about the draft. We're going to talk about the draft all season long. I know that there's a lot of optimism about Jim Harbaugh and how the Chargers are going to perform this season, and so people probably don't want to think about the draft, 7 months out. But that's what we're here for, and so that's what we're going to do. Before we do that, make sure you guys, of course, do all the YouTube stuff. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, make sure you get all of those alerts when everything goes live. And if you'd like, you can also find me on Twitter, X, whatever it's called. I don't care. At Alex Katson. Again, same way you see it spelled on the screen. I'm going to be doing draft stuff, Charger stuff over at Chargers Wire, as I have been for the last couple of years. Husky stuff for the University of Washington. I'm on the beat in person this year, as well as some draft stuff over on a Substack I run with a friend of the channel, Devin Jackson. And so I am going to be booked and busy all year, but I am here with you guys to talk about college football. Let's go, dude. So the Chargers went to 7 games last week, which is a lot. If you guys remember from last year, first of all, this show is going to kind of go through some of those prospects that we saw in those games. Last year, we found Notre Dame cornerback Cam Hart in week 3 of the college football season in mid-September. Of course, Hart ended up being the Chargers' 5th-round pick in April. So to kind of give you guys an idea of like why we do this show, that's why, is because then when Hart gets picked in April, you guys can go back to that episode from mid-September and you can say like, hey, I knew about this guy months ago. This rules. And it rules for me too. It's awesome to be able to look at those guys and be like, oh wow, we talked about them on the show. Um, but if you remember from last year when we first started the show, the first couple weeks of the college football season, the Charger scouts are going to be really active on the college football trail. This is mostly because the Charger season hasn't started yet. And so they're going to be going to a bunch of games. They're not going to be as busy with in-season stuff. You may have seen, like, for some of the nationally televised games, like there's GMs from other teams that are out at those games. Joe Ortiz is going to be a lot more like Tom Telesco was, where you're not going to see a whole lot of him going to those games. It's mostly going to be Charger scouts. Some GMs like to be out there. They like to go see things in person. Some GMs like Ortiz and Ravens GM Eric DaCosta, who Ortiz worked under for 2 decades, Telesco, guys like that, they don't like to be out on the road as much. And so they'll send those scouting guys out to go do those games instead. But the Chargers went to 7 different games. That doesn't necessarily mean it was 7 different scouts, but there were 7 different games that they went to. Bunch of prospects that they took a look at this week. We will start. We're going to go in basically reverse chronological order, roughly. And so, like Penn State, West Virginia, that game was on, I think, Thursday of last week. But we're going to do that one last, kind of work our way from most recent to most far away. And so we'll start with Southern Illinois BYU. This was a little bit of a surprise they went to. BYU is not expected to be particularly strong, I would say. Southern Illinois is a nice FCS team, but nothing super special usually. BYU does have an edge rusher. His name is Tyler Beatty. Pretty strong edge setter. Not a super great athlete. Probably going to be a late round guy. He got 7th round grades in the spring. Going to be more of like a base defensive end. That's a fit for the Chargers in the sense that, like, they don't necessarily have a lot of guys who are really good run stoppers on the edge, behind obviously the main 3 guys. Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, Tuli Pilotu, All of those guys are pretty good against the run. Behind that, like, you have Bud Dupree, who's going to be in a DPR role this year. Chris Rumph is on IR, obviously, for the whole season, but he's obviously struggled as a run defender his entire time as a Charger. A lot of those other depth guys have kind of struggled against the run. And so Beatty is a guy that, kind of fits a missing piece of the defense, so to speak. Southern Illinois does also have a safety who had a really good game. Ubayed Steed had a forced fumble on BYU's quarterback on a scramble. He's been super productive in his career. He was at Towson for a few years before he transferred out to Southern Illinois. Was on the 2023 All-Conference newcomer team when he came to Southern Illinois last year. Sixth-year guy, probably going to be a UDFA target, but someone who popped in this game with any FCS prospect in these sorts of games. You're looking for them to just like play up to the level of competition, because that means that like once they get to the NFL, they're going to play up to that competition as well. And so you always kind of want them to always kind of be taking that step forward. BYU also has linebacker Ben Bywater, who I know is a favorite of some of my friends that do more hardcore draft coverage. Versatile guy, can line up at any linebacker spot. He's lined up in the slot. They've even put him way outside, like at outside corner on a couple of plays. Mostly going to be a special teams guy in the NFL, I think. He's a little small. His athleticism is really going to help him on special teams. I think that he's someone that could very easily take like Troy Dye's role on the Chargers for this year, where Dye is kind of on the team as the fifth linebacker. He's going to play special teams. Those guys are usually pretty interchangeable, as we've seen the last couple of years, especially with the Chargers. Like obviously, Amen Ogbogbamiga was in that role last year for the Chargers. This year it's Troy Dye. Maybe next year it's Ben Bywater. He is going to be an older prospect too. He graduated high school in 2017, which is only a year after I did, and I just turned 26 today as of recording this. Today is my birthday. Thank you in advance for your birthday wishes, even though they will be belated by the time this video comes out. But Ben Bywater, only a year younger than me, which means that he is going to be like 25, 26 as a rookie. So that'll play into his evaluation a little bit as well. Chargers also went to Cal versus UC Davis, so a pretty local matchup for them, two teams from California. Jaydn Ott is the headliner here. If you guys watch any college football, you probably know who Jaydn Ott is. He's going to be an early contender for RB1, although there's a guy out at Boise State who had 6 touchdowns this week, Ashton Genty, who is my personal RB1. But Jaydn Ott is really, really good. He rules. If you haven't gone and watched any Cal football, which I don't blame you, Cal hasn't been great the last couple of years, but go back and just watch for Ott because he is awesome. Chargers are obviously looking for a long-term answer at running back. Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, both on one-year deals. Kamani Vidal is a 6th-round pick, not necessarily going to be like the 1A guy going forward. Sorry, Alex, the other Alex. But the Chargers are looking for someone that's going to take on that kind of like 1A role, and Ott is in their backyard, definitely fits that bill. He's been Cal's entire offense the last couple of years. On the defensive side of the ball, they also have an edge rusher, Xavier Carlton, who got like 5th-round grades in the spring from NFL scouts. He's going to be like a potential sort of like secondary, tertiary rusher as sort of like a DPR sort of role. Had 3 pressures against UC Davis. Obviously, it's going against lower competition, and so how much stock do you put into that really? But he's someone that I kind of put a star next to and keeping an eye on for the rest of the season with that strong performance, with the Chargers going out to visit him this week. UC Davis's running back, Lan Larison, is also a guy to watch. Probably going to be a UDFA, but he had 4 yards after contact per attempt in this game against Cal. Obviously, playing for UC Davis against a ACC now team. God, that feels weird to say. But playing against an ACC team, right? Like the blocking probably wasn't great, but Larison is running through those tackles. He's getting 4 yards after contact. He only ended up with like 3.8 yards an attempt, which basically means that he was getting hit in the backfield on like every play and still grinding it out. That's something that NFL teams are going to love to see. He's probably going to be a UDFA to monitor. UC Davis has produced a couple of those guys that have kind of been on the fringe UDFA range over the last couple of years at running back. But he might end up being someone kind of like Elijah Dotson, who came from Sacramento State, where it's like you sign him to a UDFA deal, you get him in for camp, and then all of a sudden he pops and maybe he makes the roster year 1 or year two, right? And then Cal's also got a guard, Rush Reimer. You'll see in that picture that he's actually wearing a Montana State uniform. That's because he just transferred to Cal this season as a grad transfer. I couldn't find any pictures of him in his Cal uniform that weren't weird and like formatted poorly. So he's in his Montana State uniform for the show. But he had 6th-round grades in the spring, transferred up from Montana State, which is a huge FCS power. Really excited to see how he kind of continues to develop. Had a pretty good game against UC Davis, which is kind of like the level of competition that he's used to after playing at Montana State for a few years. Really interested to see how he kind of holds up as Cal gets into conference play against some tougher opponents. Iowa versus Illinois State. So the Chargers have had a pretty heavy Big Ten lean the last year or so. Obviously, hired a bunch of staff from the Big Ten this offseason with Jim Harbaugh bringing over a bunch of his guys. And so they went to Iowa. Sebastian Castro is going to be the guy for me to watch here. Primarily a slot guy, has a little bit of safety flex, but has mostly played slot corner at Iowa, is kind of like that slot safety archetype that you see the NFL employing so much more lately. He had a forced fumble in this game. I think that he's more of a late round prospect right now, just because like you don't really know exactly what he's going to be. He's probably just going to be a slot guy once he gets in the NFL as well. But like playing slot in college and playing slot in the NFL are a lot different, because college teams don't necessarily put their best receiver in the slot on every play like the NFL does. So how he kind of holds up against that level of competition, I'm interested to see as well. He'll have plenty of chances with that Big Ten schedule. And so he's someone that I'm kind of keeping my eye on for the rest of the season. Illinois State has a tackle, Hunter Sembrano, fringe draftable grades, got like a 7th-round grade in the spring from the NFL scouting service. He did allow 1 sack in this game, but generally he's a pretty good pass blocker. He's on the Senior Bowl watch list. Obviously, the Senior Bowl loves to highlight those small school guys. They generally have a pretty good hit rate with those. So if he's on the watch list, he's definitely someone to watch for me. We'll see if he parlays that into an actual invitation down to Mobile this February. It'll be the first week of February this year instead of January. I'm so used to saying January. But really interested to see how he plays against like FCS level competition, and if he does get an All-Star game invite, to see how he kind of holds up against stronger competition again with a second go around. Luke Lachey came back from a torn ACL to play for Iowa in this game. 6 catches on 8 targets. Probably going to be more of a middle rounder. You want to see how he comes back from that ACL injury. Obviously, a lot of those guys, like the recovery time is faster than ever for an ACL, or down to like 8 or 9 months until you're back to playing. But we're still seeing that like there's kind of a year of like a lag effect where it's like you're not quite the same that first year back. And so, our team's going to take a chance on him kind of taking a step forward as he gets in that second year recovery, plus an NFL strength and conditioning regimen. He's going to be a big part of Iowa's offense. It looks like they don't really have any receivers outside of maybe a true freshman kid that they found in this game. And so, Lachey is going to be a big part. It's an Iowa tight end, generally a pretty good bet. And then defensive tackle Yaya Black, mostly a 3 to 5 tech, was mostly playing in the B gap for Iowa in this game. Primarily a run defender, kind of like similar-ish to Justin Eboigbe, but the Chargers are always looking for more depth on that defensive line. I think there's some churn that's going to happen there. We've seen the kind of the back of the roster churn under Ortiz this offseason that I think is going to continue. Black is going to be kind of like an early day 3, maybe middle of day 3 guy, according to spring grades. So again, in that sense, kind of similar to Eboigbe, but like once you get into like the 4th, 5th, 6th round, like those guys churn much more often than it seems like they should. And so it's completely possible that, he ends up on the Chargers and maybe displaces Eboigbe or displaces Matlock, who just moved to fullback, or, someone else, and kind of takes a spot as a 3 or 5 tech there. Georgia versus Clemson. This was a big one, of course. 2 top 25 teams, pretty good game. Georgia did end up kind of beating the crap out of Clemson by the end of it there. But I had a lot of fun watching this one. This is one that I kind of watched start to finish. I thought Tate Ratledge had a really good game for Georgia, playing against that Clemson front. We'll talk about in a second. But Peter Woods, who's a true sophomore, so he's not on this list because he's not draft eligible, but that guy's going to be a top 10 pick next year. I thought Ratledge really held his own. Didn't give up a pressure for Georgia in that game. One of the few offensive linemen that I thought played well for the Bulldogs. He also has center flex. Their center that was replacing Cedric Van Pran was injured coming into this game. There was a lot of chatter about like Ratledge moving over to center so that his backup could come in at guard rather than the backup coming in at center. And so he does have a little bit of that flexibility. Obviously, the Chargers going to be something that they're looking for because there's not really a backup center on the roster. Brendan Hymas is still here, but he is upgradable, certainly. And so Ratledge is someone that kind of gives you a little bit more versatility from guard to center along the back of the offensive line. I think he's going to be kind of a day 3 prospect as well. So someone that won't be super expensive to acquire. Thought he had a really good game against a really good front. So I'm keeping an eye on him. Georgia's obviously going to play a hard schedule this year. And so fascinated to see how he kind of plays with a little bit more run. Demonte Capehart is kind of the guy next to Woods. He didn't have quite the same game that Woods did because Woods had an incredible game that had everyone talking about him. But still had a really solid game. He's going to be like a 1 to 3 tech. So a lot closer to like kind of the role that like Puna Ford or Tier Tard is going to play for the Chargers this year. He's a potential first rounder in my eyes. I think that him and Woods are both going to be first round picks when everything is all said and done. I thought he was really solid against this Georgia offensive line that is rebuilding, but is obviously still very, very, very talented. Like I said, Ratledge was kind of the only guy that had a good game against that front. And so I kind of want to see Capehart, maybe have a little bit more impact on the box score, but at the same time, he's a defensive tackle. Those guys typically just don't have that sort of impact, which is why you have to go back and watch the tape and kind of see that like you're making an impact on the game that is beyond that sort of line. What's not beyond that sort of line is what Malaki Starks did against Clemson. If you guys haven't seen the clip of his interception that he had against Kate Klubnik, it will be very easy to find. I'm sure you can just search his name up pretty much anywhere on the internet and you'll be able to find it pretty quickly. He is someone that I have circled like big, 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 big time for the Chargers this year. He's going to be safety 1. I think he's going to be a first rounder. But safeties typically go towards, sort of the middle to the back of the first round, depending on like how generational, to use a bad term that I don't like using, they are as a prospect. And the Chargers are probably going to be ideally in that range, of course. If they sneak into a playoff spot, if they just miss the playoffs, they'll be kind of like right in that middle range, like, 14 to 20-ish, let's say. And I think that's right about the range that Starks is going to start. He's super familiar to this staff. Obviously, the Michigan staff played against Georgia a ton, especially in the college football playoff. And Starks can line up anywhere. He's kind of a perfect fit for the Jesse Minter defense in that way because he has over 300 snaps in his career in the box, in the slot, at deep safety. You can put him anywhere. And so depending on how Derwin James plays this year, struggled a little bit last year. They're hoping to unlock him a little bit more with Minter's defense, but he is going to be, 28, 29 this season. Depending on how he plays, Starks might be a guy who, you bring him in the first round, have him maybe take a little bit of a smaller role as you kind of like see if Derwin is going to, kind of make a comeback. Maybe he plays, over Gilman a little bit, and makes that defense even more multiple. But like he's a fantastic player. He's going to be like, he is very, very close in my eyes to like a can't miss guy. He's awesome. I thought Clemson tight end Jake Browningstool was also really impressive in this game. Had a lot of really nice catches outside of his frame. Klubnik was not super accurate in this game. He was under pressure a little bit, but also like he just looks kind of bad. But Browningstool really bailed him out on a couple of throws. There's a one-handed catch that he had in this game, a couple other nice catches that he had outside of his frame. Had like round 4 or 5 grades in the spring. But he looks like he's going to be like a primary option for this Clemson offense. They don't really have any receivers that I like outside of like Antonio Williams. They're going to maybe turn to a couple true freshmen in order to like inject some juice into this offense. I think that Browningstool has a pretty unique opportunity to be a focal point. Tight ends are not typically a like big factor in the passing game in college offenses unless you're Iowa. And so I think that kind of gives him a really unique opportunity to shine as a receiver and kind of show the NFL like what he's able to do. Stanford TCU, fewer prospects in this one, but there are two wide receivers, both of whom I think kind of fit what the Chargers need. First one being Elic Ayomanor from Stanford. Probably saying that completely wrong. The pronunciation will get better as the season continues and we get more familiar with these guys. But Ayomanor, of course, broke out on the scene in that Colorado game, that late night Stanford Colorado game last season. Has kind of emerged now as like a legit prospect, the number one option for Stanford. He had 7 catches for 102 yards in this game. 6'2", 210-ish. He looks like a pretty prototypical X receiver, and that's kind of what the Chargers are missing. I personally like playing Josh Palmer at the Z more than I like playing him at the X. Ladd McConkey is obviously going to be your long-term guy in the slot. The Chargers have DJ Chark and Quentin Johnston listed as the or starters at that other receiver position, at that X position. And so, unless Johnson takes a huge step forward this year, which he always could, it looks like he's making some progress. They're going to be looking for another guy to sort of fill that role. I think that Ayomanor fits that bill as someone who could potentially do that. Savion Williams from TCU is also someone that could do that. He's 6'5", 225. I know that he's another TCU receiver with dreads. And so, we're probably already like, oh man, I don't want Quentin Johnston again. But wait, there's more. He also has drop problems. He dropped 3 passes in this game. But the saving grace here, he did have 11 catches for 85 yards and a touchdown. They were just targeting him all game. Uh, you know, Needs to clean up the drops a little bit. It's not really a problem that he's had like career-wise speaking. So, interested to see if that's just a one-game fluke or if it was just, suddenly he's picked up a problem. And then also, I have him listed at corner, but he's really more of just a general DB. Bud Clark, again, kind of like that slot safety archetype, which I think the Chargers are really leaning into. Obviously, Derwin is going to play a little bit of that role. They traded for Elijah Molden, who is like that mold to a T. We talked about Sebastian Castro from Iowa. Bud Clark is another guy like that. Again, sort of like later round grades, but he has 8 career interceptions. So super productive guy around the ball. He also took like 34 snaps in the box for TCU in this game, which is almost more than he's taken in an entire season in his career up to this point. So TCU is deploying him in a couple different ways this year. Really interested to see if that continues or if that was just like a game plan thing. Because if he adds that versatility to his game, then that's something that could be really appealing to the Chargers and Jesse Minter especially. Chargers also went to Utah versus Southern Utah. Big Utah presence this week for the Chargers, going to the BYU game, going to the Utah game. Obviously, Steven will be happy about this one. Lander Barton is the guy to know here. If Harold Perkins wasn't playing linebacker, Lander Barton would probably be much more in the conversation for linebacker 1. Clemson also has Barrett Carter, who's coming back after not declaring last year, but it's a conversation. Lander Barton deserves to be in it. He's got 2 brothers that play in the NFL. Cody Barton is a linebacker with the Broncos. He's also played with the Seahawks. And then Jackson Barton is a offensive tackle who's on the practice squad for the Cardinals right now. He's a great coverage linebacker. Lander is kind of like the perfect modern linebacker in that way. Plays kind of similar to Cody. Honestly, if you've seen Cody Barton play, I think that Cody is one of the more underrated linebackers in the NFL from a coverage perspective. And so it's not surprising that kind of carries over to his brother. There are some injury concerns with him. He has missed some time in both of his first 2 seasons at Utah. Had a really nice game against Southern Utah. Obviously, lower level of competition. Want to see him against, a Big 12 team, but excited to see him healthy. Excited to see what he might be able to do this year. And he is someone that, even though it might not necessarily be a need, he is someone that I kind of have circled for the Chargers just because it would be fun. Utah's also got an edge, Connor O'Toole, who had 3 pressures in this game. He's going to be more of like a designated pass rusher type guy in the NFL, just because he's a little bit light, only like 250. Has struggled a little bit in run defense, kind of intermittently while he's been at Utah, but does have 50 career pressures in 2 seasons plus 1 game. Those 3 pressures got him to exactly 50. So someone I'm interested is kind of like a DPR. Again, like if Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack both play well this season, you don't need to find the long-term answer next to Tui Pelotu like this draft. You can just draft an edge 4 to replace an aging Bud Dupree. And so O'Toole might be a solution there in that sense. And then Southern Utah's got a guard who I think will get some sort of invitation, whether it's a training camp invite or a UDFA contract. Lyle Santos, 0 pressures allowed in 24 snaps. Obviously, both teams kind of pulled the starters pretty early because it was a blowout. He's got pretty good pass blocking grades career wise. Has played left guard, center, right guard. That versatility always helps your case as a UDFA. Again, another guy who the Chargers might be interested in bringing in, based on what they saw in this one. But you know, and then finally, Penn State, West Virginia. The thing that I want to remind you guys of before we talk about any of these players in particular is that the Chargers went to 6 Penn State games last year, and the scouting staff is basically the same as it was last year. Obviously, the top has changed. Joe Ortiz is the new GM. There's a new assistant GM. Corey Karice came from Baltimore to be like an analytics director. But the middle and lower tiers of the scouting staff have stayed almost completely intact, uh, unless the Chargers haven't announced those changes. And those guys are the same ones that went to Penn State 6 times last year. So I would probably bet that there will be a Penn State player on the Chargers next year, whether it's a guy from last draft class or a guy from this draft class. Um, Before we talk about those guys, though, West Virginia does have a tackle, Wyatt Milam, who is arguably one of the best tackles in college football. Had a really nice game against a really good Penn State front. Obviously, Penn State's got Abdul Carter and like Danny Dennis Sutton, which is a really good edge duo for them. No pressures allowed in this game, even as West Virginia kind of struggled against this Penn State team that should be very good this year. He's more of a pass blocker, so that's kind of to be expected. Had a little bit of a hitch in the run game. Um, Despite his like college football prowess, he is graded as like a round 4 or 5 guy. And so he might be someone that the Chargers could pick up as potentially a swing tackle option. I would like to see them upgrade over a Foster Sorrell, who has looked good at guard, but I still don't necessarily trust as a swing tackle. Once you get into day 3, spending a pick on a guy like that is not really that big of a deal. I think that would be potentially a good option for them if his stock kind of stays in that range. Um, Penn State wise, Kevin Winston Jr. is the closest competition to Malaki Starks for safety one. He had a phenomenal game. He was all over the field for Penn State in this one. In the elements, it was kind of a nasty game that got delayed for a long time. More of a traditional safety. He's really only played like deep safety. He comes into the box every now and then, doesn't really play in the slot as much. But that honestly might be a better fit for the Chargers if Derwin has a really nice season this year, because if you want to move Derwin into the slot, if you want to move Derwin around, you need a second deep safety on a lot of those plays. Alohi Gilman obviously is going to be back there, and then the Chargers are either going to put Elijah Molden or AJ Finley back there. Both of those guys are good players. Obviously, Finley had a phenomenal preseason. Elijah Molden has plenty of starting experience with Tennessee. Molden is also a free agent after the season. And Winston would be a guy, again, where it's just kind of like inject a little bit of youth, stabilize that position like longer term. I could definitely see the Chargers doing that. It would cost less than Starks, probably be like a second rounder. So something to think about just fit wise for the Chargers there. West Virginia also has running back CJ Donaldson Jr. Came in as a tight end recruit and then just moved to running back when he showed up. Was a guy that popped in the Pitt game as a freshman a couple years ago. Has kind of been on my radar ever since. Didn't get a lot of opportunity in this one just because the game state only had like 12 carries. A little bit more of a churner, kind of just a power back, like gonna like run through you, not around you. Only a junior, so he might not even come out this year. He's only got 268 attempts on him. He'll probably get another 200 or so. So he'll be at like 500-ish by the time the season ends. That's a pretty heavy workload for a college running back, but not heavy enough where he like will not have the opportunity to come back at all. So someone to keep an eye on. May not end up declaring, might be a next year guy, but either way, kind of someone to circle there. And then Nicholas Singleton at Penn State has been someone that's been on radar since he was a freshman as well. Had 13 carries for 114 yards and a touchdown in this game. 6.5 yards after contact per attempt. So, like, it's not even like Penn State was blocking huge holes for him all night. He was running through guys. That is an outlier for his career. Career-wise, he's only averaging like 2.5, 3 yards after contact per attempt. So I do want to see if that trend continues or if it's just maybe a tackling problem with West Virginia's defense. And then Singleton also does need to clean up the fumbles a little bit. He's got 5 in his career already. Did not fumble against West Virginia, so he's off to a good start there. But want to see him just clean up that ball security kind of as the rest of the season goes as well. That is it for this week, guys. Because there were so many games to recap, we're not going to do a preview this week because we're already over time, actually. So I got to wrap up this intro pretty quick. But thank you guys so much for joining me. I'm so happy to be back for this season. I hope you guys are excited too. Please let me know who else stood out to you. Maybe someone I missed. Obviously, I didn't watch all the games. I'm out on the beat and stuff, like I said at the beginning this year. So I'll be kind of catching up as I go. So any guys that you see stand out to you that you want to have me talk about on the show, I'm more than happy to look into them a little bit. But hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Bolt up, baby.